in a way, we're all setting out on this election fandango together, but not many of us really understand what it's like at the centre, fighting a national general election campaign. Someone who does is Alastair Campbell, the right-hand man to Tony Blair back in the day. Earlier on, I asked him about the sheer pressure on leaders fighting campaigns. He said that 4 weeks was almost unendurable. What will a 6-week one be like?
Even worse. I think look, there isn't, if you're into politics, you're into campaigning, there's part of it that you're going to enjoy. But I think people underestimate, who haven't done it before, just how tiring it is. There's no such thing as a day off. There's no such thing as a proper night's sleep. I think particularly in the modern age where stuff is getting thrown at you literally all the time. And also, particularly for the leaders, there's such a demand on your brain, on your energy, and it's utterly exhausting. And I think it's exhausting when you're winning. So what it's like when you must be feeling like you're losing is absolutely beyond me. I suppose the closest I got to feeling like that was when I went back to try and help Gordon Brown in 2010. But even and 2005 as well, it sort of felt a lot closer than the first two, but it's utterly exhausting. By the end of the campaign, you just want to kind of, vanish for a few weeks.
So for folk who have never been through this, who are getting the other side of it, getting the broadcast side of it, what is it actually like to go through? Take me through a day of typical campaigning. What happens?
Well, you get up.
When?
Well, I used to get up probably about 5. Tony would get up probably a bit later. You've got to get on top of what's kind of running through all the media. Now, that shouldn't take you too long because people should have done that for you overnight. You then have got a day that you're planning that should have been set in stone in advance, but sometimes you have to change it. I think one of the most exhausting things, even if you've got Rishi Sunak's penchant for helicopters, travelling is very, very tiring. And the other thing for the leaders in particular, you're probably looking at doing, several media engagements per day, several engagements with the public per day. Maybe less so these days, but I still think big speeches are an important part of campaigns. So you're working on speeches. And also, don't forget, if you're the Prime Minister, as Rishi Sunak is now, or if you're Keir Starmer thinking you might be the Prime Minister in a few weeks' time, a big part of your mind has got to be fixed on that as well. So it's a kind of relentless, never-ending, you're moving, you're trying to find time to think, you're trying to find, you're trying to make decisions that have to be made. And you're doing it in this kind of really intense sort of goldfish bowl where, as you've seen today with Rishi Sunak, every single visit he's done so far seems to be something has gone slightly wrong because everybody's looking for the thing to go wrong the whole time.
Asking the Welsh how much they're enjoying the football and so on.
Absolutely. And then discovering that the people asking him the questions at a biscuit factory were actually Tory councillors in orange jackets. And so you find that your energy gets drained very, very quickly.
Absolutely. So, Alistair, you have tried to, as it were, plan these things yourself in the past. How much of the time are you thinking about which parts of the country do you need to get to? When you get there, what's the backdrop going to look like? Can we avoid John Prescott hitting a voter and so on? In other words, you're thinking ahead of what might go wrong.
Well, you're planning in the hope that things that won't necessarily go wrong. Certainly, the logistics can be very, very complicated. I think today there's probably greater security around the political leaders, and therefore the police can be very, very helpful at sort of sorting a few of the logistics out. But certainly, you're relying upon people on the ground. Certainly in our day, I don't know if it's the same now, we would have small team in advance. They would go in advance to make sure everything was set up. And then when you get there, again, it will depend on the personality of the leader. What Tony liked to do was to know at the start of the day what was going to be happening. Then just before everything happened, saying to him very, very quickly, right, this is where we're going, this is what we're doing, this is who's going to be there, this is the point, these are the points that we're trying to land. And of course, Tony was brilliant at just kind of absorbing that and then doing it. But I think these days, particularly with social media, everybody filming everything on their phones, I think it can be a lot more fraught.
Well, I was going to ask you about social media, because I remember back in the day following a Neil Kinnock election campaign at the back of the bus with various people, and I think including one Alistair Campbell at the back of the bus as well. In those days, you stuck with the leader all day. At the end of the day, or the middle of the day, there would be a big platform speech in front of an audience. I'm thinking of the Llandudno speech and first Kinnock in 1,000 generations to go to university. And in some respects, those campaigns in the 1980s were a bit like what was going on even in the 1940s. But now with social media, it all does feel very, very different.
It is very different. I can remember those. And also on the social media point, I can remember on that same election campaign, we went to a place in Yorkshire where Neil was about to speak. And I remember there were more people turning out to watch us on early mobile phones, which were like suitcases, than there were to watching Neil's bus arrive, because there was this sort of excitement around this sort of cavalcade. I thought that today was a very interesting example where the event that I mentioned that Rishi Sunak did, I think that would have been unthinkable back in those days, because it struck me that the media were merely there as spectators. They were just covering it while these planted questions were being put to him. And I think what's happened is the scale of the media now is such that it's much, much harder for the media to properly engage with the politicians. I think that's been a loss in a way. And at the same time, you guys have got so much space that you have to fill. So you kind of, the 24 news channels basically say, well, we'll take anything. What's Keir Starmer doing now? What's Angela Rayner doing now? Just get it on air. But I still think it's possible in a campaign for a leader with a message to get that message through. It's just that it's a bit harder than it used to be.
I'm going to ask you about two things that could conceivably go wrong for the Labour Party. One seems to me to be the overarching national story or narrative at the moment that Keir Starmer is going to win a huge thumping victory. People don't terribly like the idea of landslide victories, and a lot of people think, in that case I might stay home. So that's one issue. And the other thing is that he, like Rishi Sunak, has not really been through a campaign like this. He's been a very, very assured performer, but he probably doesn't quite know what's ahead of him, and therefore the possibility of something going wrong is quite high.
Well, I think to take those separately, I think the first one is a real issue which the Labour Party should take the lead in addressing. You will know about something called the Queensland strategy, which was a strategy operated in Australia, in Queensland, where the incumbent, who everybody said was going to lose, basically did the message, don't give these guys a blank cheque, don't give them the landslide that they think they're going to get. And guess what happened? The landslide never happened, and they lost. Now, that's unlikely this time, but I certainly think if you combine that with apathy and general cynicism about politics, is a problem. So Labour should be taking the lead in saying, we have got to fight like we can lose this, and they've got to then show that. I think on the second point, stuff will go wrong. Stuff will go wrong for all of the parties. Stuff will go wrong that will irritate them. I think what Keir Starmer has shown in his leadership, and it's so interesting if you think about it, if we were having this conversation after the Hartlepool by-election a couple of years ago, the general feeling around Keir Starmer was this guy can't win. And now we're going into an election where people say, this guy can't lose. Now, you're right that it's a problem on one level, but it's a better problem to have than this guy can't win.
That's a very good point. Let me ask you about the guy who's the brains behind the campaign right now, Morgan McSweeney, who we both know. He seems to me to be one of the really formidable street fighters of modern British politics. And one of the things he has done is focus the Labour campaign intently on the seats that Labour has to win. This is going to be the most targeted election campaign probably ever. How do you see him as a tactician, and how do you think his input is going to play out?
Well, I think that you're right that this is going to be a targeted election. All elections, parties have limited resources and they have to put them where they think they can work best. And I think what was interesting was in the local elections and the mayoral elections, they were doing it almost like a dummy run.
Yeah.
So they were, and I was getting messages from some people who are in the Labour Party saying, Jesus, we just had a message, we've got to move from here because we've got to go there. And that would be because real-time data would have been analysed and people would be moved around to places where, there was a better chance of winning. And the Liberal Democrats are going to do a smaller scale version of that as well, inevitably. So I think that's obviously smart thinking. And I also think, by the way, that one of the possible reasons why Rishi Sunak went for this earlier election is because the Tories probably do have to, at this stage, have a financial advantage, which the party conferences would have probably upended, because Labour was standing to make a lot of money out of their party conference from business. But listen, Morgan McSweeney is a big part of Keir Starmer's operation. He has been right from the word go. And to repeat the point that they've gone from can't win to can't lose is down to the strategy that they've pursued.
It's a pretty remarkable story. You and I are going to be equally exhausted in 6 weeks' time. Alistair, thank you very much for talking to us today.
My pleasure. All the best.